What will God do with your simple yes? Hey, and welcome to The Whole Truth, where I am taking you through the entire Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation. We're not skipping anything. Today it is 2 Samuel chapter 17, and we'll be starting or picking up in verse 15. So just after yesterday's video when we did, well, and who knows when you watch this, I don't know. This could be years in the future. That's the whole goal of what we're doing here, is to teach through the entire Bible and have a free commentary for you to and a free Bible study for you to be a part of at any time. Anyways, 2 Samuel 17, and we pick up in verse 15. Remember that David is the king in Israel, but his son Absalom has tried to overthrow and has overthrown the kingdom to some degree. David, to keep from bloodshed and to keep from civil war, David has left, and he is on the run again. This is similar to what we've seen from David in his younger life. David in his younger life, he had to run, and he had to run from Saul. Now he's having to run from his own son, Absalom. And Absalom has received some really wicked advice from this guy named Ahithophel, and he's followed that advice. And now Absalom was trying to figure out how to deal with this David problem. His dad David is on the run, and there are still some people who are evidently, as we'll see today, some people who are David fans. They are still following King David, and they still want David as their king, and they know David is their king, and yet Absalom is trying to overthrow that. So Absalom was seeking advice, and he talked to Ahithophel, and he talked to Hushai, and he tried to get these advice from them, and he chose Hushai's advice, but Hushai is actually a spy for David. David had sent him back into the kingdom and said, no, go stay and send word to me. Well, now you're going to see how that plays out. Remember, Ahithophel said, let me go and I will kill David. I will take him out. I'll take 12,000 men with me and I'll kill David, and only David. We won't shed anybody else's blood. Hushai said, no, get everybody together, and you, Absalom, you go after him. He's buying some time and he's warning David. That's where the story's picking up. Read this with me. Start out with just the first couple of verses here, 15 through 17. Then Hushai said to Zadok and Abiathar the priest, thus and so Ahithophel advised Absalom and the elders of Israel, and thus and so I have advised. Now, therefore, send quickly and tell David, saying, do not spend this night in the plains of the wilderness, but speedily cross over, lest the king and all the people who are with him be swallowed up. And now Jonathan and Ahimaaz stayed at Enrogel, and they dared not be seen coming into the city. So a female servant would come and tell them, and they would go and tell the king. They would go and tell the king David. I would encourage you, take a moment and go grab the study notes. I want you in your Bible. I want you reading your Bible. That's the whole point of what I'm trying to get to. And I've made these study notes that go along with that. And you can pick those up for free. They're over on Patreon, the best place to locate them. I've indexed them very nicely over on the website. So you can go to thewholetruthbiblestudy.com. The Whole Truth, like the sign behind me, biblestudy.com. Just go to the study library, go down. They're all indexed there. Go to 2 Samuel, and then go on down at the bottom of, well, it'll be at the bottom today, and then it'll work its way up as I keep adding more indexing to it. But for now, you just scroll down and find 2 Samuel 17 and then verse 15. 2 Samuel 17, 15 through 27. Click on that, and you'll see the video that we're watching right here, and you'll see the study notes. Click on those study notes, go download them. It's a free PDF, and you can use them to follow along with this study. The first thing I put here is that when God is working quietly when the world is loud. You know, how often do we find that to be the truth even still today? That while the world is loud and things seem sometimes even out of control from our perspective, out of control, and yet God demonstrates that he is perfectly in control. That God has a perfect plan. David is the anointed king. Absalom is trying to usurp that. Absalom is trying to take out David. Hushai sends word. How does he send word? Through Zadok and Abiathar. Well, Zadok and Abiathar, they can't be seen coming in and out of the city. They can't be seen coming back and forth. So who do they talk to? They talk to a girl. There is a woman, a young lady, who is Team David. She is still for David. And she is helping to get word between Hushai, who's one of the Absalom, the guy overthrowing. It's one of his advisors. He's actually an advisor and a helper for David, but he's a spy. He gives word to the girl. The girl gives word to the other two to tell David, do not stay in the plains, because here's the plan. This is what Ahithophel said. This is what I said. They've taken my advice. So you have a little bit of time. The nation is being gathered up. All the people are going to come, and Absalom's going to be with them. And Absalom is coming to kill you. Do not stay in the plains. And so there's like a message that's being passed between these different players. I would just point out to you that all of this is happening quietly and behind the scenes. You can imagine the streets are bustling with people who are going after Absalom. Remember, Absalom won over their hearts. Remember how he did that? Remember how he sat at the gate, and he would, when people would come with their things, Absalom would basically take up for them, and he would say, "Oh, if I was the one in charge." Oh man, there's nobody here now. There's no deputy here right now to help with your case. But if I was in charge, I'm telling you, you're in the right. And he would shake their hand, and he would kiss their head, and he would tell them that they were right, and he would console them. And he took 3 years, and he won their hearts over. And then when the day came that he said he was the king, people were like, well, we love this guy. We love Absalom. And so they wanted to follow him. So he's tricked these people. Now he's got them, after he's kind of bamboozled them, he's got them ready to go after David, his own dad. Absalom has done that. But not everybody is blinded to that. And while the world is loud and grabbing their things and packing up and being ready to go out and go take care of this situation, there's still those who are working quietly and behind the scenes and notice that they are accomplishing the will of God. You know, the will of God is not always in what is the most popular. As a matter of fact, many times it's kind of in the opposite. Many times when we find the will of God, it's not in what everyone else is jumping on. It's not in what everyone else is doing, but it's in the quiet and the behind the scenes. I would take that as good news because, you know, sometimes what you do feels like it's quiet and behind the scenes. I think about these videos that I make. I still am in the position that I make these videos, I make these Bible studies, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Bible studies, hundreds of notes that I've put together. And I put out a video the other day. It was out for 23 hours and it had 21 views. I looked at it, I was like, well, there you go. And you know, there's hours of writing and hours of work that go into these. And sometimes I get in my own head, and I know I've told you that before, and I'm not saying that for any sympathy or anything of that nature. I'm just telling you that to say, you know what I trust is that God is working in the quiet, that God is aligning things, that those who need to hear these messages are receiving those messages. And if that's just one person, then I trust that. And I've proven that before through church, and God has grown the church. And I believe that God's going to grow this ministry as well. And I totally trust that. I'm trying to encourage you with what you're doing. You know, maybe what you're doing feels like everyone else is doing all this big stuff, and it feels like you're kind of just doing the small thing. And don't misunderstand me. If God's calling you to do something bigger, you ought to get up and do the bigger thing. But I hope you understand what I'm saying too, that sometimes God called you to do something and he's calling you to simple faithfulness. Will you stay faithful to what he's called you to? Will you stay faithful to his son? Will you stay faithful to the call that he's put on you? All right, well, let's look at verses 18 through 21 now. So grab your Bibles, 2 Samuel chapter 17, pick up with me in verse 18. Nevertheless, a lad saw them and told Absalom, but both of them went away quickly and came to a man's house in Baharim, who had a well in his court, and they went down into it. And when the woman took and spread a covering over the well's mouth and spread ground grain on it, and the thing was not known. And when Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house, they said, "Where is Ahimaaz and Jonathan?" And so the woman said to them, "They have gone over the water brook." And And when they had searched and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. And now it came to pass, after they had departed, that they came out of the well and went and told King David and said to David, arise and cross over the water quickly, for thus has Ahithophel advised against you. Many times faithfulness involves personal risk. Here are these guys. I misspoke earlier, and I'm sorry about that. There's two other guys in the mix here, not just Abiathar the priest and Zadok the priest, but you have these other guys that are runners in between Jonathan and Ahimaaz. Jonathan and Ahimaaz can't come into the city, so they're the ones that had to get the message back and forth to David. So you've got one people talking to the next people, talking to the next people. They're passing the message on through these faithful servants. Well, Jonathan and Ahimaaz are literally risking their lives. I mean, that's what's happening. Remember, there is a new sheriff in town, if you will. There's a new guy usurping authority. And these two guys are faithful just as Hushai is, and just as Abiathar and Zadok are, and just as this young woman is. These two guys are the runners. Well, they're seen. A young lad sees them. You can imagine what the scene maybe looked like as these two guys are spotted and they see the young lad and they go, hey, and the young lad goes off running. Well, now what are you going to do? You going to chase him and make a big old scene? So they go running off. This girl takes them to this guy's house in Baharim, and we don't even know this guy's name. He taken to this guy's house in Baharim, and they go down in the well, and she takes a blanket and puts it over the well and puts grain over top of it. It's a grain well, and she puts it over top of it. Listen, every single person is risking something right now, and I want you to think about this. They're not in the palace. They're not in the kingdom. They're not commanders in the army. These are regular, average people using regular, average things like a grain well and a blanket and some grain. These are two guys that they're just on Team David, and they're running before and after. They go between to go get the message to David, and their lives are at risk. God will advance his kingdom through people who are willing to take the risk to be obedient to what he's called them to. Sometimes, many times, when you are being faithful to God, you have to accept the assumed risk of obedience. Sometimes that risk might be sometimes that risk might be to your own personal testimony, to your own personal credit, where someone might think something of you, to your own reputation. Think of like Joseph and Mary. When Joseph was told by the angel to not be afraid to marry Mary, because what was conceived in her was from the Holy Spirit. But what was at risk for Joseph? What was at risk for him? Was his own testimony, was his own character, what people would think about him, what people would think about his marriage. And yet that was the risk that God had asked him. That was the obedience that God had asked him for, was to be faithful and go ahead and marry Mary. And throughout the scriptures, we could find one after another where God has asked someone to be faithful. And if you look at it from their perspective, you'll start to realize they didn't know. We know the whole story. We read these Bible stories. We know the whole thing. We know what's coming at the end, but they didn't know that. I think about the guy I think it's Acts chapter 8. I said the guy is Philip, and he's told by the angel. He's woke up in the middle of the night, told by the angel, run to the desert, go to the desert. And so that's what he does. He goes to the desert, and then in the desert, he sees a caravan of people. And I mean, obviously a caravan means there's somebody wealthy there. And he hears again, run up to that chariot. Can you imagine the thought? If you saw an entourage of people, especially out in the desert, would you run up to them? That is crazy when you think about it. I would never. I mean, I might stand to the side and watch what's going on. I might maybe give a gentle wave, but to run up in the middle of the crowd, in the middle of the caravan, and when he does, he hears the Ethiopian eunuch reading from the prophet Isaiah, and then he knows. And he says, do you know what you're reading? And the guy says, well, how can I, unless somebody explains it to me? And Philip gets up in the chariot and explains it, and the guy gets saved, he gets baptized. It's a beautiful story, but it would have never happened if Philip wasn't willing to be obedient when he was told to get up and go to the desert in the middle of the night. Get up and go to Gaza, the desert, in the middle of the night. Run up to the caravan that you don't even know who they are. You see, obedience often comes with risk. Are you willing to take the risk for the Lord. All right, verses 22 through 24. So David and all the people who were with him arose and crossed over the Jordan by morning light. By morning light, no one of them was left who had gone over the Jordan. And when Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, he saddled a donkey, arose, and went home to his house, to his city. Then he put his household in order, and he hanged himself and died. And he was buried in his father's tomb. And David went to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed over the Jordan, and he and all the men of Israel with him. And Absalom, and that's it. And all the men of Israel were with him. You know, we see two things that are happening here. The first one is that Ahithophel went home and he hung himself. Now, there's kind of some thoughts that run through my head about Ahithophel going and hanging himself. The first one is that, you know, his advice wasn't taken. So that's what it says, that he saw that his advice wasn't taken. Remember, he said, let me get 12,000 men and I'm going to go and I will take care of David. I will kill David for you. Hushai said, go get everybody and you take everybody and you go and kill David. And that's what Ahithophel now sees, that it's not just that his advice wasn't taken, but it was that Hushai's advice of Absalom going and killing David. That is the advice that was taken. And so Ahithophel probably knows a couple of things. The first one is this. He probably recognizes that Absalom is not going to win this battle. He was wise. We have to recognize that Ahithophel was smart. He was wicked, but he was smart. Ahithophel can probably see the writing on the wall that David is going to be the king again. And Ahithophel knows his days are numbered. It kind of, in a way, reminds me of Judas. You know how Judas betrayed Jesus? And Judas betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, but then after Jesus was crucified, don't you see how Judas went and hung himself? He tried to give the money back and he went and he hung himself. I feel almost the same way with Ahithophel. Like Ahithophel sees that either way, they're either going to kill David and it's going to promote Absalom, and then Ahithophel's going to be in for it because everybody's going to say, well, why did you give that other advice when, look, you were just trying to get the kingdom for yourself? Or David, which is what I think more than likely, that he realized, David really is the king. Absalom is not the king. I've chosen the wrong side. Nonetheless, he went and he hung himself. The other thing that stands out to me is that he went and put his household in order, and then he went and he hung himself. It's kind of crazy to me that he's got the wisdom to go home, and he's got the forethought to go home and get his house in order. He went home and said goodbye, and he made sure his will was in place, and everybody knew where he had stashed his wealth and all of those things. He went home and took care of everything, and he quietly went outside, and he hung himself. His plan was thwarted, and his life was ended because he chose the wrong side. Well, then you see that David gets up and David gets over the river just in time. This wasn't because of some plan that David had. David didn't plan this out. David was just following the warnings that God had given. And because David did what God told him to do in just the right time, David gets over the river just about the time that Absalom is coming his direction. Why did that happen? Because God was the one in control. Even though everything seemed out of control, and even though for us it kind of seems like a movie scene where like the elevator door closes on one side and the person rounds the corner on the other side, you know, that type of a scene, David just barely gets over and there's nobody left in that area when Absalom gets there. But it's not because David was so smart that he had figured it all out, but it was because he was following what God was telling him, and God was the one who was controlling this narrative. You know, David is not using his kingly power to dodge any of these situations. He's not calling for his army to rally up with him. He's not doing any of those things. David is following what the Lord said, and the Lord is using the simple obedience of regular people like God always seems to do. You know, whether you think about it being midwives with Moses, who preserved Moses and helped to bring the deliverer into the world, or whether it's shepherds announcing Christ. God uses ordinary people all the time. And then there's this last thing that happens. Look at the last three verses with me, 27, 28, and 29. Now it happened when David had gone to Mahanaim that Shobai, the son of Nahash, and Reba the son from Reba of the people of Ammon, Makar the son of Amiel, and Lodibar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogelim, brought beds and basins and earthen vessels and wheat and barley and flour and parched grain and beans and lentils and parched seeds, honey and curds, sheep and cheese of the herd for David and for the people who were with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. David crosses over the other side. Like I said, it's like the movie scene. The elevator door closes and then the person rounds the corner. Absalom comes into the area and David and his men had just gotten over. They get to this new area, and when they get to this new area, the Lord had inspired someone, and they gathered up a collection of sheep and raisins and water and supplies, and they brought it, and sheep, like flocks of sheep, they brought it to the people so that were with David. David's got some people with him. Who knows exactly how many are with him, but David's got some people, a group of people that have followed with him as he has left the kingdom. And these people gathered up supplies and they brought them to David because they recognized that him and his men would be weary. I feel like this is one of the most honest pictures of the way that God sustains his people through the generosity and obedience of simple faithfulness. The person who will say yes and give a little bit. If you think to yourself, well, if I give a little bit of raisins for David and his men, what's that really going to do? But when you combine the raisins from these people and the sheep from these people and the sheep from these people and the water and the vessels from these people and the basins from these people and the bread from these people, and you put them all together, they were able to go and sustain and do something great. I think that that's one of the things that bothers me about the church today is how separated the church is from one another. I just wonder how much of the kingdom we could take on. How much of the gates of hell could we push back? How much of the darkness could we push back if we would work together? If we would collaborate together and cooperate together. And I know that you might look at me and you might say, well, wait a minute, we're part of the Southern Baptist and we're part of the cooperative program. Yeah, you're part of the cooperative program that only cooperates within your group. And I see this through so many that say, well, yeah, but our group believes this and our group believes this. And I'm not talking about, do not come at me and say that I'm trying to talk about false teaching or false doctrine or some cult. I am not talking about that. But I'm talking about Bible-believing Christians, Protestants who believe in the work of the Lord and want to follow him. And yet we fight with each other and we compete with each other over some of the most trivial matters. You all, some of the things that we battle over are some of the most trivial matters. And none of them should be a reason that we don't link arms together for our King Jesus, that we don't pool our supplies together for our King, the one who technically is actually sustaining us. I know that in the story, it's a real story and it really did happen, and David absolutely did have this need. But Christ does not have this need. Christ does not need you to bring him food. He's not hungry and he doesn't need food from you, but he is willing to allow you to be a part of his kingdom and a part of his kingdom work. And it can even be through ordinary means. So maybe that's like me sitting in front of I have a camera now. I used to just sit in front of a cell phone. Whether it's me sitting in front of a cell phone or a camera, using a little bit of equipment to make YouTube videos to help further the kingdom, whether it's using my knowledge and my training, my schooling to preach sermons and teach the Bible, but maybe that's not you. Maybe you don't teach the Bible. Maybe for you, it's your family. Maybe it's your homeschooling. Maybe it's your homeschool co-op. Maybe you're going to do like what we've done. Maybe you're going to start a school at your church, a tuition-free school to push back the darkness that's happening with our young people. Biggest mission field in America is our 56 million, I believe is the number, 56 million American students that are in public education every single day that need the hope of Christ brought to them. And the churches sit with their doors closed and locked 5 days a week. Maybe the Lord would inspire you to use your church house to open up schoolrooms and to bring students in and give them the gospel of Christ in their education. Maybe God would use you to do that. Maybe God would use you in your ordinary things and your ordinary means. I love that Samaritan's Purse with Franklin Graham does such a huge outreach with shoeboxes and toys, little trinket toys, and they put in gospel tracts, and they send out missionaries, and they send out evangelists to go out and spread the gospel by giving out shoeboxes, a little shoebox full of things to children who were in need. I love ordinary means when God uses ordinary things to do extraordinary things. That's what we saw in the text today. It's the way God sustained the church throughout all of history, and I believe he'll do the same with you and I today if we will say yes to him. Well, I certainly hope you've enjoyed today's video, and I hope you come back tomorrow because we'll be in 2 Samuel chapter 18. I'll see you then.